It's 5:30, so we'll call to order this meeting for the City Council. Monday, September 30th, 2019. Carl, can I get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Remley.
Here.
Ronayne.
Here.
Lunsman.
Here.
Reif.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Bunceness.
Here.
Olson.
Here.
Rux.
Here.
Mayor Schoeneman.
Here. Please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll start off by approving the minutes from last week's meeting. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Take a motion from Johnson, a second from Olson to approve last week's meeting. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion does pass. Next, we've got open forum. We've got one speaker. It looks like it's on a topic that we'll be covering under new business, so I'll delay it for that discussion. Move on to old business ordinance 190901, ordinance to rezone lot 1, Steel Tigan addition to Aberdeen in the northwest quarter of the southwest quarter of section 16 T123 R6W3 of the 5th PM Brown County, South Dakota from District I2 to C2.
Move to approve. Second.
A motion from Ronayne and a second from Clint Rux to approve. Does anyone have any questions as it relates to that prior ordinance? Otherwise, can I get a roll call vote?
Councilmember Remley.
Aye.
Ronayne.
Aye.
Lunsman.
Aye.
Reif.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Bunceness. Olson.
Aye.
Rux.
Aye.
Mayor Schoeneman.
Aye. Motion does carry. The next item we've got to discuss is the consent calendar possible approval for routine city business items A through E. Can I get a motion to pass those consent calendar items?
Moved.
Okay, I've got a motion from Rumley and a second from, was that you, Johnson?
Olson.
Oh,
Yeah.
from Olson. How many voices? Both sides. Does anyone have any questions as it relates to any of these 5 items? Otherwise, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion does carry. Next, we've got a new business item, ordinance 190903, ordinance amending the city code regarding conflicts of interest, improper use of public office by council members. Possible first reading of ordinance 190903. Can I get a motion for the possible first reading?
Can I ask a procedural question before we do that? Because Ron, we publicized the ordinance that was what I'm considering the old ordinance. Now, there's a significant amendment. Do we need to pass, or do we need to make a motion on the original ordinance and then amend?
You do not need to do that. What you need to do tonight is as far as a possible first reading on some form of an amendment, as long as it's contained tonight at the conclusion of any amendments, then that's all you need to do for our purposes. So you don't have to introduce the one that was placed as part of the agenda packet if there's a different one that will be offered.
So if there's
Okay.
major structural changes, you don't need to publish that information as per law?
It's still part of the same, as long as the major structural changes are still part of the same idea that's set forth in the agenda item, then you would not need to.
Okay, so I'm going to make a motion to, for the amended language, which significantly changes the conflict of interest ordinance that you will see on the screen.
Second.
Sounds good. And since since you're the author of this, why don't you introduce it for us?
I think Mr. Bunceness was going to do that.
So this has been a long process, and our city charter tells us that we, as a council and as a mayor, need to be held to a higher standard than any other basically city official in the state. The charter says that we will be held to a state official level. So in 2016, that level changed with the Gear Up and EB5 issues that were before the state. They made some changes to state law, which created 3-23. So there was a proposal for a conflict of interest policy that, for me, was confusing as a non-lawyer. And so Councilmember Ronayne and I got together, and was decided that we would propose an ordinance that followed state law. State law that is specifically addresses school boards. So a school board has to follow this conflict of interest law at the state level. And that's exactly what's being presented before you tonight, with just some terms changed, and there are some other minor areas that you decide whether they're minor. One change is, instead of having 45 days after a contract is signed, you have 14 days to disclose that. Under common business practices, we removed a term called services. We added the terminology of promotional funds. So one of the things that you find in state law, and they addressed the Gear Up scandal, is that they just didn't handle, Gear Up didn't happen within state departments. It happened with an entity that they granted money to. So they dealt with it, and that's what we're proposing also, is we deal with money that we give to other entities within this. So that's the proposal. Now, one big difference from the state statute and ours is in the violation language. What they say is removal from office. Okay, so if a school board member is found to have violated state law, they are removed from office. They could be accused of theft, and misdemeanor, I think, is another piece of language in that. So, it's pretty severe. We haven't done that. Our violation language is very similar to what it was before, is that this council will decide, basically. And so that's a huge change from state law. And you might laugh at that. That's, I think this council is fair, okay?
No.
So, this is state law. This is what a school board, so Brad Olson, Kevin Burkhardt, mention any of the school board members here in Aberdeen, they have to follow the same law. Okay? They have to follow the same law. But they have, if you want the removal language in there, which I don't believe we can do, we can talk about that. That's just an automatic. So, anyway, that's my proposal. I also would suggest that in order to give people an opportunity to look at this, dissect it, that we would hold off second reading for 2 weeks.
Dave, you mentioned the term promotional funds. Now, I've read this over very carefully, and I didn't see a trace of the word promotional funds or the notation of it throughout this entire ordinance. Is there a place within this ordinance that you can point to the term promotional funds?
The term is not spelled out, but if you look at, for example, 2-2A, it talks about, and probably halfway down, which the city or any person who received an allocation of municipal funds for the calendar year is dealing with that.
So municipal would be promotion funds? Okay.
It's
Could be.
When I asked Ron, he took it to mean anybody, whether it's a road construction company or whether it's a bank or any other entity, any equipment sellers. There's a heck of a lot of entities that are doing $100,000 worth of municipal fund, or receiving $100,000 worth of municipal funds.
I think-
Dozens upon dozens.
I think in the old language, we spelt it out in 3 different areas, didn't we? Municipal,
We
or
did.
taxes and,
I think the language was the same in the old proposed ordinance, but we
Yeah.
refer to it as an allocation of municipal funds. And if that's not clear, that it means an allocation either from the promotional fund or elsewhere in our budget. We also, of course, allocate in the budget to other entities outside of the promotional fund. So that was what it was intended. And if it's unclear, we should tighten it up.
Give me an example of an entity that would receive municipal funds outside of promotional funds that you feel would be fair to
Lynn,
cover
would-
within this?
Lynn, would you help me with that? We do some social,
Aberdeen Development Corp.
yeah, thank you. Aberdeen Development is a good example.
But like B&B contracting, for instance, that wasn't what you were intending to do, or Dakota
Heavens
Bank,
no.
or your Plains Commerce Bank.
Heavens no.
Heavens.
And I
So the
think,
language could be amended to be promotional funds, and you'd be satisfied with that.
Well, I think we need to cover those other entities that are given donations from the city as well.
Could we exempt certain people from that? Say, a normal course of business, for instance, Wright and Sudlow. Because I'm sure they get more than 100,000.
actually, in the amended language, you have section E, which says circumstances under which any city or any party who received an allocation of municipal funds for the calendar year of the commencement of the contract. And this follows state law too, where there are certain circumstances where the person can still do this. And a lot of it has to do with disclosure.
Right.
Was it part of the competitive bidding process as outlined under state law? So this is language mirrors more for what state actually does, what even state officials on numerous various boards, school boards, certain township boards, education agency boards have to follow. There is still a provision where you can, and it's provided under section E. And it basically goes through, you have to disclose, if we find that the contract is fair, if they're providing the service at the same cost as what other people in the community do. So this language is much better than what the first language was, is it does give the certain opportunities if you follow the certain steps, and there are certain instances.
Yeah, my question would be, for instance, a Wright and Sudlow, right? Or someone that you might not realize is going to get $100,000 from the city per year. Are they going to be exempted from that $100,000 number if it's not from promotional funds or other?
so does Wright and Sudlow typically bid their projects?
Yes.
Under 2-2D, there's what I call carve-outs. There's
Yep.
exceptions to the rule. The bidding process that Aberdeen goes through, Aberdeen City, they would be exempt.
Okay.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it's confusing to a lot of people, and even according to you, because 2-2, what you're saying is the exemption is for an entity like Wright and Sudlow to serve on this council. Josh is asking, what about an entity or a person that serves on this council to work with Wright and Sudlow who's a $100,000 recipient? Those are two different elements.
So if we need to tighten up the language on the $100,000, we can do that.
So that, like, promotional.
So the first part of that sentence is which the city, and that I believe is municipal taxes. I believe that is what we're considering for the our operation here. And then it was thought that that language that was part of the old ordinance, that obviously is not clear to some, is encompassing the promotional dollars, or any dollars that go outside of the city. Okay? So
But
obviously
we're
we
talking
need to.
about you, Dave Bunceness, doing business with an entity that receives $100,000.
So if I'm doing work for, okay, so I'm not the contractor. I own Dami Construction and I'm doing work for Aberdeen. So
No, I'm talking about you. What if you were to provide your business services to Dami Construction, a business-to-business agreement, but Dami happens to be doing more, that's what this is all about. Dami happens to be doing more than $100,000 worth of the city. The bidding process has nothing to do
So
with that.
I don't think that the intent of that language was for a Dami's Construction, a B&B, the typical vendors that you see that the city doing work for.
So
Am I getting to what you're,
At-
okay,
at the-
Josh, but what about you, Mayor? I
So
mean,
there was 62 entities in 2019 that have already received $100,000. And,
So those entities do work directly with
well,
the
presumably,
city?
or I don't even know how some of these got on the list, but it was a who's who of Aberdeen's business. And you as a business person, I would imagine, don't want to be restricted to be doing that. And think of the impact of all the business people within this community that are
So
doing
there are
business
some,
with Crawford
so
Trucks and Equipment.
I would just tell you that this impacts the school district as much as it does us, okay? This is the same thing that the school district today, the superintendent, the school district, school board members, business manager, we can name them all, they have to follow this exact language in state law. And so if it's impacting them, then I haven't heard about it, okay? So, and then there's carve-outs. There's D that tells us where you don't derive a direct benefit. And then there's, like Clint mentioned, E, that you disclose your relationship and then we deal with it. And, you know, I can't, so in 1998, the day before I got married, the school district had a policy that they had to vote on my wife's contract in order, because obviously a conflict of interest. The day before. Okay, so what were my choices? Roll the dices, okay? So this is not uncommon. And particularly after we've gone through some pretty major scandals that, you know, the state doesn't want to go through anymore.
You're talking EB5.
EB5, Gear Up. Gear Up was huge. Those were monies that went outside of the state. They didn't go for some department within the state, like, you know, whatever. That was grant money that left.
Are you familiar with IM22?
that was passed in 2016, and then the legislature went back because, and
It
I'll
was
be
a
on-
poorly written
It was a poorly
ordinance.
written ordinance. This is probably in 2017 what had the state legislators sit there and change that, and then they came up with this whole new section. Because if you look at section 3-23, this is, you know, whether state officials and public employees, that whole section was written in 2017. And
16, 17. I think
16,
there were some
17.
changes in
Yep,
17.
there were some changes in 17. So that, what they did is take probably a poorly written law and say, I think this works a little bit better for us as a state than the stuff that was poorly worded and
Right.
extremely restrictive, et cetera. I
The
was
hastily passed law.
hastily passed, but I think in the,
walked
in
back
the,
because
in
it
the
was so
wake
bad.
of EB5 and Gear Up, what people did is they voted for this law because they were tired of the two issues being in the news as well. So then the state legislature went in and made numerous changes to this, and that is basically what we're kind of passing now, where they even have in their exceptions. And I think the most important thing with this is you know, under section D and E, where you can do it in these circumstances, but you have to disclose it. You have to disclose, and then we can handle it in a manner, whether we say you have to abstain, you have to leave, you know, let's say an executive session if we have that party, and we've done this before. Even as a city council, if someone has had an issue where they have a conflict, and Todd has done this several times, Jeff Mitchell did it a couple times, Todd Bagnich, where there was an issue, they abstained from the vote, didn't take part in discussion, and that was basically what you have to do.
So the previous version specifically called out adult members of a household, spouses, commingled assets. Does this one do that? I didn't see it flip.
It does, I believe, and if I can, Let me find it for you.
Two dash B.
Yep.
On page 2.
There we go. Yeah.
2-2 B.
So does an employment agreement fall under this circumstance? Like your other job, for instance, if, are you gonna find yourself in trouble if you work for the sheriff's department and the sheriff's department or the county receives $374,000 per year?
You know, Mayor, I think you are confusing what is intended to, that allocation is intended to be donations from the city, not contracts with DOMIs, not contracts with the county. And if the language is not accurate enough, is too loose, we should tighten that up. And if you're raising good questions, and if somebody else, if you're confused by it, somebody else will be. And I think it's, I think that's.
Including
language that
Ron,
we
I
can-
asked him and he thought for sure that that meant vendors.
Well, let me be clear. By being clear, I'm going to be as gray and as muddy as I possibly can.
You are a lawyer.
Way to go.
Because the language talks about an intended beneficiary of a contract, and that's where it gets hard. When you're talking about somebody who's an employee of a B&B or an employee of the county who receives money, is that person then an intended beneficiary of some contract that the council is awarding or that the city might have with the city? That's where it gets really hard. And that's why sometimes these things, you can't even answer it until you know all the facts. And I've been doing a lot of tap dancing today because of that, is that when you post something, we never, it's hard to get the full picture of what it is the facts might be. And so is it possible that we're talking about a vendor? Yes. Is it possible that we're talking about another governmental entity that's receiving money? Yes. Now, whether that means that they're a direct beneficiary of a contract, I don't know. So.
Yeah, I don't understand how it wouldn't. So didn't mean to call you on the spot there. It was just the information that I was working with here. Does anyone else have any questions? I guess I posed a lot of questions, hogging a lot of time here.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, it stands to screw me the hardest, so I'm just, kind of worked up about it.
I would
One
think,
thing I would say is that we should have dealt with this in 2017.
should have done with it in 2006.
When we passed the conflict of interest policy. That's when it should have been done.
I have one question, and it has to do with the violation part. And you did cover this. And my question is this: when we talk about if someone is in violation, and I'm trying to envision a point where there wouldn't be some sort of maybe an additional conflict if the city council decides that we're gonna say someone did violate the conflict of interest, and then we're also gonna be subject to disgorgement. And if we decide how much money we're gonna take from them, if they did something and they profited somehow, to me it would make sense if it's a state law, and it comes down to a violation period. The portion on the violation, if it is determined by the city council that they did violate the conflict, can we then transfer that maybe to the state's attorney's office and let them decide what the actual penalty will be?
Well,
I think it'd be difficult for us to say, let's say I was in conflict and I did something and I profited, and we determined I profited, and then I leave the room or whatever, and you say, well, you're gonna be fined this much and this much. It just seems to be above maybe what we should be doing.
well,
Does
at the
this
same,
chamber have the authority to
yes.
withdraw money from a person's account?
I don't know if withdraw, but
Let me respond to Councilmember Rife's comment there. To the extent that this is an adoption of an ordinance, the enforcement of that ordinance would have to be done by the city. The state's attorney would not enforce the ordinance. So if there's a violation that results in a disgorgement, it would have to either be by this council or by the city attorney as prosecutor. So I just want to answer that.
That's clear.
Yeah.
under the,
But like if we all ganged up and said Mike Olson owes $300,000, we could do that? We could just one day vote on that?
Well, the disgorgement language is directly taken from the statutes that deal with what state actors would be subject to if they violated this.
But that doesn't have to go through a court system?
Well, it would ultimately go through a court system, and that's how that disgorgement would be done, as well as the potential nullification of contract. That would go through a court system. Excuse me. Whether this council has the authority to invoke those types of remedies is unclear to me right now. I will tell you that. I understand that the council has the ability to police itself and police itself within reasonable guidelines. The ability to kind of go outside the council, whether it's a civil action for disgorgement or some kind of a nullification of a contract that involves a third party, I don't know. And I'm not prepared at this time to say that the council would have that authority.
If you go under the Home Rule Charter, we as a city council have the right to judge the qualifications as well as police ourselves, as Ron said. And that's been there since 2005. There's actually a section in the Home Rule Charter that says that if 2/3 of us say that there is an identifiable conflict, we can vote on that and basically say you have a conflict and you have to abstain from that vote. No different than the city council could remove one of its members now, even without this, should someone, let's say, be convicted of a felony or no longer be able to meet the qualifications of the office. Let's say they move to out of their district or whatever. So there are places in that now. We've never done it, but it's very similar to every other charter written in South Dakota that we as a body police ourselves. Could I ever see? I think if you took 300,000, I think the state's attorney would probably be on notice for something else anyway. But there might be other things. But like I say, we as a body can police ourselves, whether it be good or bad. I don't think I've ever seen anyone in the time I've been on here gang up on anyone. Sure.
The police force is separated from the judicial system.
Yes.
The officers in our police department can't go demanding money from people. Well,
If they violate a law, yeah, but they can't go.
So I think let's come back to the ordinance that's proposed. So the city charter, which was passed in 2004 by 55% of 11,686 people, 3 times the amount of people that voted in the last mayor's election, a significant amount of people voted for this charter. None of us on this council were part of that, but they brought it forward. The conflict of interest language in this charter states that we will be held to a state official level. If we do nothing, you still are held to, in my opinion, to the state official level, which could be more severe than what we've proposed tonight, because there are 2 different sections to 3-23. One is what is done for the state official, and one that is done for the local school board official, or superintendent, or business manager. This is on the lighter side. It offers not first dollar, it's with the first $5,000, you don't have any issues. That's just where we're at. The charter tells us what needs to happen here.
so the
And
charter.
if we need to improve some of the language as far as the promotion fund language, then let's do that.
I will say thank you. I mean, it's not very often you get the pub, everyone's so, this is one of those issues where the sausage is being made and everyone is watching it very closely. And I think from where we were, to start with, to where we're at now, I commend you to say that, it's, in my opinion, we're better off now than we were before with this language.
Right, I
makes more
think,
sense.
we met last week with Ron, and you brought up some great points, and so you dig a little deeper, and it just made sense to apply the law for this ordinance, to say that a school board member in this community, that we shouldn't be held to that level, especially when the charter tells us that we need to be to a state official level. The school board member in this community will be held to a higher level than we are. I just don't believe that makes sense.
My only other question, and I feel like I'm sorry if I'm asking a lot of questions, it's this can be confusing. Can you talk a little bit, Ron, about the public bidding process? Just so everyone's aware of how that works and what that is and what it isn't and that sort of thing.
So the word bidding gets thrown out quite a bit, and
Yeah. So here's what I can explain, that walking into this job, you realize that bidding means two different things, entirely different things. And under state law, there are four chapters of South Dakota law that deal with they call it procurement, public procurement. And it's competitive bidding in a governmental sense, which requires that the bid be handled in a certain way. It can be at auction, at sealed bid. It has to be noticed, that there has to be a period of time that it's placed out there. There's a procedure by which the awarding officials or governing body are required to act with respect to those bids that come in, what items need to be bid, what don't have to, what amounts, what levels rise to the level of requiring a bid. But the competitive bidding or the public bidding process is a very unique animal. And so when people talk about something being bid, I need to make sure that they understand that this governing body operates on a whole different definition of bid. And that's what public bid means.
Sure. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Section D, number 6. If the contract is with the official depository as set forth in SDCL 6-1-3, why is that in there?
Which one are you looking under?
Yeah.
I'm
D,
looking-
subsection D.
Yeah, section
6.
D, section 6, it just looks pretty specific. I would recommend that that exception is great, well and good. Let's just let people that are paid board members of banks remain on this council. But let's also expand that to 6-1-2, which are the other exceptions outlined in 6-1-1, which is the law that specifies the activities that municipal officers are allowed to do. Now, the state law was created
I
to...
think you got to go up to D, subsection 3, for your. I don't think that a board member from a bank is excluded.
Yeah, no, they aren't.
I don't think they are excluded.
That's what section 6-1-3 in the South Dakota state law does provide for.
No, it says unless a person is employed by a party as a board member. So, I mean, it gives the cutout, I believe. Now, someone correct me if I'm wrong, because obviously I don't get paid as a lawyer here, okay? But it starts out saying, based on a person receiving income as an employee or independent contractor or party, but then it says, or unless the person is employed by a party as a board member or executive officer. So it's saying...
You can't do that.
They can't.
But then 6-1-3 allows for it. It overwrites it, allows for it specifically. I'm saying, great, let's do that. But let's also include 6-1-2, which are a series of other exemptions that when the state laws were being created, they specifically were looking at municipal officers. They allow for things like bidding to get these jobs that would otherwise be prohibited over the $5,000 threshold and so forth. They've done a great job outlining those things. I'd say we'd be stupid not to take their guidance and include 6-1-2 as well as the one that you decided to include 6-1-3.
I did not decide to include this. This is state law, okay? This is, except for violations. This is almost word for word state law 3-23, 6 through 8.
That includes
So number
a
9,
reference to 6-1-3.
it does.
Yep.
This was not, this is, and if it's there and it's not in 3-23-8 or 7, then it's a mistake. But it was, this is a copy paste from state law.
And I think, if I'm reading,
7-2.
So the only, let me just go back. The change in the violation section, it's not called violation, subsection G, it's not called violation, I think it's called removal from office. That's where you get the breakout of you're removed from office, you could be accused of theft, misdemeanor, and disgorgement is the remedy. And so that's what we did not include in this language. Disgorgement we did, but, you know, that's up for debate.
Can you pull up 3-23-7, was it?
Mayor, here's,
I got it too.
Here, I have it on the screen.
okay.
yeah, 6-1-3 has to, 6-1-3, I think, says that, you know, a bank may be designated as official depository, and that's what that references there.
Sure. I still would like to include 6-1-2, given its proximity to 6-1-3 and the fact that it was written for municipal officers, and I think it provides a pretty good outline for doing business with
But
the
I
municipality.
think where there's probably a little confusion is that the state or the city charter says that we have to, at a minimum, meet the highest standard for state officials. And actually, 3-23, 6 through 8 would be the highest standard for state officials.
But they never took into consideration that maybe a municipality would adopt this as their own language. It was specifically created for people with high salaries, people that didn't need to make it or wouldn't be expected to make
No,
additional
that's
income.
not, I don't believe that's the case, because if they would have done that, then school board members wouldn't be included. School board members make half as much as we do, and
Fraction.
they are under this state law.
But what kind of business would they be able to do that would be a conflictory?
Well, there's a variety of people that are on the school board. I'm not going to make a determination of what conflicts they might have or
But
could
with the
have.
school district itself. Like Aberdeen is a $34 million enterprise in this town. It touches nearly every business that exists here.
I can't remember what the budget for the school district is, but it's pretty significant. When you take all the capital funds and it's a pretty significant dollar amount.
I think the biggest thing that, I think we get hung up on what we can do. I think what this ordinance does is, with state laws, is it tells you have to identify the conflict and say that I'm either up for this contract or I'm doing this, and it gives you the steps that you can take to where you identify the conflict, and that we, as a board, whether we say that's fine, because it even says that, you know, if guess what, you're giving services at the same price as anyone else, or through a competitive bidding process, you just have to identify the conflict and you just don't participate in the vote or the
But
discussion.
in that circumstance, Clint, in a circumstance in which it is a competitive price, does the council still have the ability to say that that's not proper? If they're, like, say the council.
If you, let's say, someone identified the conflict because again, it's laid out, you have to identify that you're going for this contract, you have to identify, if you get this contract, You're basically letting the public know, as well as the rest of us, that there's this potential conflict out there, and that we can then handle it. It's not.
I'm not going to try to play lawyer again, but I am.
Oh,
So if this was under, my understanding of this language, under 2-2D sub 5, if this went through the public bidding process, there is automatically, it is what they say, does not derive a direct benefit from or have an interest in a contract.
So
I
in
would
a
think that
circumstance like
in
the
that
chamber's
circum-
logo, would you say that meets the qualifications of a public bidding process, or does that not run?
That's where I will stop being a lawyer and let it Ron determine.
That would not. That's not what a public bidding means.
So can we expand the language so that it would include that type of a project? Like, how does that language change from public bidding process to allow for maybe not a state-sanctioned bidding process, but like a reasonable process by which we could say people that we trust with our marketing dollars can make a determination to choose the lowest bidder or the most qualified?
There is probably language that can be put in there to broaden that, to allow for an open bidding process, and otherwise approved process, and I don't know who ultimately approves that, whether it be this council, but.
Could it say something like a reasonable bid or something like that? We get rid of the public, a reasonable public bid, and leave it at that, and then we know that that's a departure from what we're saying that for concrete contractors and so forth?
Here's all I would say is that could this council do that? Yes, it could. It would be a lesser standard though than what the state law is. And that's, so if it was a matter of putting it to a process that somehow satisfied I think the concerns about a public bidding, and again, the problem with public bidding, the protection about public bidding is that it's open and it's transparent, but it also has accountability on both the bidding itself and the enforcement of the contract. Because if there's change orders and pay requests, all those have to be approved subsequently as well. So the public bidding process is a very vigorous, robust process.
And that's your interpretation based on this connecting with the state law, or that? Because if you read this as an average person, you wouldn't think that referred to a state statute, would
When you read the rest of 3-23, chapter 3-23, you see that or maybe it's 6-1, I'm sorry, chapter 6-1, but they're referring to a competitive bidding process under the public procurement laws. So, again, this council can expand that language, relax that language to include other bidders, but it would be a lesser standard. Because this body would not have the ability to make that process accountable.
So am I correct in thinking that the language in the city's charter doesn't even apply unless there is this ordinance? That it's activated by this ordinance essentially? That's what I took from Councilman Ronane's comments earlier when he spoke. The language of the charter reads in such a way that none of it within the conflict of interest clause takes effect unless there is an ordinance. And that's what my attorney told me to begin with. But I definitely understood that Councilman Ronane had brought that up at the time.
Yeah, I don't think that's my opinion. That isn't what I said. What I said is that I believe the conflict of interest provision within the charter, 7.01, I think that it says two things. It does say, as you say, that we are going to adopt an ordinance, but I think it, in essence, adopts the highest standard that exists under state law, which is section or chapter 6-23. So I think that applies that.
323.
23. 3-23. And so I do think that applies it against us city officials.
and that's not uncommon language in any charter. Every charter in the state of South Dakota has this same language in it.
How is it that the mayor of the city of Spearfish is doing professional
Not
services?
a home rule.
It definitely is.
It is.
Yes.
Again,
met with their
I
city
didn't look at
administrator as
Spearfish. I
well as
looked
their
at,
mayor,
I
and
looked
spoke
at,
through the legalese and their city attorney, and they assured me that it was the same exact situation. We did page through documentation backing that up, and they've been doing it for years.
yeah. At the same point, I looked at Sioux Falls, Brookings, since they're a similar size, Watertown's new charter and Pier's charter. All that same language is in that charter. I'm not specifically sure what's in Spearfish's home rule charter. Brookings actually and Sioux Falls actually have stricter standards than what's in state law. Let's say, for instance, in Brookings, it's a contract amount is $3,000, not $5,000.
So Mayor, have you seen the Spearfish charter?
No, I relied on their city's attorney to tell me the details of it, and I'm sure that they would know it better than I would, even
Because
if I read
when
it.
I looked at the Municipal League website, and maybe they don't have it updated, I didn't see Spearfish listed as a community with a charter.
We didn't either.
So
They are,
I'm,
yeah.
so I'm just asking if, we can look at it.
Sure. I think that might be a good standard to hold ourselves to as well. So have anyone have a trouble with changing the word allocation of municipal funds to allocation of promotional funds as it relates to the $100,000 limit? We were talking Dakota Bank is a recipient of more than $100,000 B&B contracting, as well as 62 other entities on an annual basis, including the school district and including the county and other entities in which we all have entangled alliances within this council.
So what was your proposed language?
We would strike municipal funds, change it to promotional funds. So the sentence would read, neither the mayor nor council member may have an interest in a contract or receive a direct benefit from a contract in any amount greater than $5,000 or multiple contracts in any amount greater than $5,000 with the same party within a 12-month period in which the city or any person who receives an allocation of promotional funds. Anywhere that sentence is copied and pasted, it's in here about 6 times, would change to promotional funds, which we were explained was the intent of this thing and how you led into this discussion.
So I think the only question would be, so Aberdeen Development Corp. is
So they
something that-
receive promotional funds every year up until
No,
last year.
they receive more than promotional funds.
Right.
They receive an allocation of the general fund. I think Worthmore receives an receives an allocation of the general fund. So it would have to be something that would be similar to, I think, what the state did, where they were trying to take care of all the entities that they give grants to. So
Do we as a
maybe-
council get to vote or have any say in how much money that the development corporation gets?
Yes.
Yeah.
In what method?
Through the
Through the
budget.
general, through the budget
voted
process,
on
you
the
could,
budget.
you could bring it up. I mean, we've had discussions in the past about that. Before July 1st. And we've also, I think we've had Worthmore here, a couple times in the past, talking about what they, are trying to accomplish, and I thought maybe they wanted some more money at one time.
Mayor, if we substituted the phrase "a grant" for the phrase "an allocation," would that do what you?
I'm not sure how would that be interpreted, Ron.
Well-
It's a grant.
Well, that's sad, but I was thinking the exact same thing, because promotional fund is actually a colloquial term that's not really in our ordinance.
Yeah.
So we would need to come up with different language to describe what that is anyway. But I think as I'm hearing, is that this isn't so much an allocation, for example, an allocation awarding a public improvement contract. This is a grant. You're talking about monies that are basically given to some person or entity to further either their mission or some mission that the city perceives as laudable. So I think if you were to substitute the word allocation with the word grant, that might achieve what you're talking about here.
So
And
how
you-
does the $100,000 threshold come into play? Did you somehow think, is it 99,000 wouldn't be a corrupt transaction, but 100,000 would, or how is $100,000 the magic number?
Well, it was, yeah. There's no magic number. We thought it was unreasonable to say that if a entity received a grant from the city, that they couldn't do any business at all. And so we thought that it should be a higher number than that, because they probably aren't going to be influenced by one of us if they are receiving $10,000 or $20,000.
I might not come speak at their event, Councilman Ronayne.
Well, then maybe
I'm a
you would.
ceremonial mayor.
Maybe
Come
you
on
would.
now.
They'd be on the edge of their chairs.
I know it. I know it. It's a giant disappointment to these groups when they learn that I might.
Hey, Ron, I'm going to put you on the spot here real quick. And the reason I'm going to do this is because there's a lot of change from the previous ordinance to this ordinance. So I'm going to give you basic examples and then tell me conflict, no conflict. Okay? It's like a game show. Conflict, no conflict.
No, I get maybes.
Okay, you can give me a maybe. So if I own it says sale of goods. So what is sale of goods? Is that like a grocery store? Is that a electrical supply store? Would all those be covered? So if I sold, electrical supplies to the city at fair or below fair market price, am I at a conflict?
Less than the 5,000?
Yes.
Then
Well,
the
5,000 is your pass. So $5,001.
So at over 5,000, at that point I would be I would have to file a report saying I'm doing this, correct?
So under state law, you would have to.
So let's say I have a grocery store, and the city buys their supplies and groceries through me, and that will be over $5,000. But I guess I'm not sure how I would track that. As if I know this is a scenario. If I own the grocery store, I don't. But in that scenario like that, how would I track that to know where I'm at in that threshold?
Well, I'm gonna, for the first time, maybe bring our finance officer into this, but our finance office actually does track expenditures to specific vendors.
Perfect.
And if it starts getting to that number that might impact one of the governing members, then they will notify that person. And I think I can use that as our example for Councilwoman Swanson several years ago, where it was the finance office that was watching as those checks were being, as the expenses were coming in, and as they got closer to 5,000, she had to be informed that you're now at a point where you would need to, the Parks Department would need to publicly bid for her husband to be able to continue to do more work.
So let's look at NSU, right? Because NSU is in the midst of a lot of projects, and that would be governed by the open or the public bidding process, correct?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So if I'm a contractor and I want to build a new athletic facility and I bid on that and I win, that would not be a conflict of interest.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
But is that not considered a grant? 'Cause NSU gets money from the
But it's
grant
a-
money from the
falls
city.
under
That would be the foundation.
At the same point, it's going through the competitive bidding process as the
So
state
the
does.
foundation doesn't handle the building projects. They take the money and give it to the city? So is that the answer for all this? The entity that gets the money can just give it to their sister entity and to work with whoever they want?
I think what the big thing is since that's a state project, the state legislature has to approve that project, to approve the money, and it goes through the South Dakota State Engineer's Office where it's competitively bid. Like I say, I mean, that's basically how it's through a process where the tax dollar is protected. That's what the competitive bidding process is there for, to protect, to make sure that the taxpayer is getting the best deal possible. So, and as far as, the chamber and that, they could have gone through a competitive bidding process where they open it up to everyone, there's accountability, you name it, and that works also.
Does that work?
No, not really, but,
It'd have to be-
they could run it through us if they wanted to, but not saying they would, but no. Again, no lawyer here, except for a couple, but, it is one of those things where, like, with a project like NSU, it is through, a much different process, as guaranteed and followed
But the
by state
entities
law.
that are receiving this, that we're targeting here, the Development Corporation and so forth, they wouldn't be able to
Wouldn't be able to what?
do the statewide certified competitive bid as outlined in South Dakota codified law.
I do know that for several of the big projects that have received TIF dollars for the Development Corp, they have to go through a competitive bidding process.
And the chamber couldn't because of what reason?
It's a private entity. that'd be more of a Ron question, I guess. Sitting here, sometimes the mind goes a little faster than the mouth.
Or the mouth goes a little faster than
Yeah,
mine?
yeah, there you go.
His
But-
mind is just racing over there
Yeah,
all the
yeah,
time.
yeah. That can be a blessing and a curse. But like I say, it is one of those things that, no different than what in state laws is basically to protect taxpayer dollar.
I mean, I guess I'll kind of back off here, but I think this is a pretty good start. I mean, I really do. And I think 2 weeks is fair for us to consider more what ifs, and see if there are some changes that we need to make. But I think
Next Monday, we should play the game, Is it a
Conflict, no conflict?
Conflict, no conflict. Turn it into, maybe we can increase our viewership.
But I do appreciate the 2 weeks because, this came up today. I think we're all well aware of the background to how it got here. But so, yeah, that'd be my closing statement here on this. I think it's a good start.
So my question for Ron is if we're going to make changes to this, what we thought was the promotional side of this, and we'll change that language, is that significant enough that will require a third reading?
Well, this whole thing was created today and wasn't published.
But it's only first reading.
It's only first reading, but
So
So
if
he's
next,
given his-
if the next at a second reading, for example, if you were to make those changes, yeah, those would be substantive changes that would require another reading before
Okay.
final adoption.
so we have at least 3 more weeks before any final
Get all the
reading.
contracts out of the way. real
What's
quick.
that?
I'll get all the contracts out of the way real quick.
Pardon
Yes,
me, Ron, were
Councilman
you
Ronayne?
saying that I dropped some language off when I was attempting to be a typist that I needed to add in somewhere?
I think
When
he added them
I
into.
did add it in. I will show
did add it in? Okay.
the council, to be
Thank you.
clear, for our minutes, what you have before you is the ordinance that was initially circulated this morning. However, the one change that I added in is at section 2-2A. It's the very last part. It's this part here, I'll just highlight right there. Is a party except as provided in, and then it actually references a statute. That accident, when this essentially got copied from the statute, that language got left out, and that's pretty important language, so
It
we
is-
need to keep
it
that
is.
in. So, and that was your intention, Councilman Busness, when you made the motion, would this language would be in there?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
And so the one question I guess that I had, does it, all of these things provide for spouses was kind of what I had taken from something that I have overheard other people speaking. Like your spouse, their employment situation, commingled assets, everything in this pertains to them. Like if you've got an adult child that works at a place that gets city funds, or if you've got, if you or your spouse works at one of those places with your day jobs, if it's either a grant or city money directly, that applies to your situation.
Well, yeah, I'm looking for the language, but I'm thinking that the language doesn't, language is not intended, as I recall, to target something that one of our kids would be doing. It's intended to target somebody who owns a significant part of a company, and that is really its intention. And I'm not finding that language.
In the last version, it said adult children. I think it specified adult children.
So
Is it on
it's
the
in
screen?
2B, under B.
So now so any of these things throughout the remainder of the ordinance cover you, cover your wife, any person who commingles assets. If you
With whom the
taken-
person lives and commingles. So I don't commingle, I hadn't commingled any assets with my children, for instance. If they were working, they were making
Did they
their own
know that?
money. Pardon me?
I said, do they know that? Who pays their credit card bills, Rob?
Yeah, no, well, I may pay their credit card bills, but I don't commingle any money with them. But you have to do both, live with them and commingle under B, under 2.2B.
And C.
If I could clarify, this language that we're looking at the screen is these elemental requirements of who is a person, including the person's spouse or other person. That's language that the council members are right now completing when they do their annual disclosure forms.
Right.
Yep.
Again, required by the conflict policy to have that kind of language in there, so.
And required by state conflict policy also.
So in the meantime, Ron, it sounds like, Josh, we're going to make a motion to table this for 2 weeks?
No.
I think we want to pass or, have a vote on first reading, then we will ask for this back in 2 weeks.
Olson, have you got something to?
Go ahead.
And then, right, and Ron has already stated that any change to that promotional area, which will happen, we want to definitely get that to be clear, will require a third reading.
And you can look also into whether or not the city council has any kind of authority to disgorge a person?
I will be prepared to have some language generally that could be offered as an amendment. And then I also try to my best to get a decent answer for the council on whether its authority would
I
allow
can't wait to
for
disgorge some of you
Yeah.
guys. So excited. In fact, I'm going to add that to every ordinance from here on out. That's my standing amendment. I'm just going to type it up. We'll have it ready for the screen. Disgorge you guys.
Mayor, are we ready to hear from our guest to
Oh,
sign up for open forum
good
as well?
point. I've totally forgotten. We've got Speaker Al Knobstrup. Sorry about that. Senator, you wanted to speak on terms of the conflict. I took this into the weeds a little bit.
Thank you, Mayor. State Senator Al Norstrup, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak. Mayor, I would ask you for some latitude in that I've got might have some interactions with the city council people with some particular questions and
Have at it.
very easy questions. And a suggestion. If you turn to page 3, number 5, there's a sentence that says, if the contract is subject to a public bidding process, and that was discussed earlier tonight. And I think it's real important, and I believe it was Councilman Rux that brought it up, and also our city attorney. And the word public here, I think, has got a very specific meaning in state law, and it's very complicated. And I don't believe, for example, we've been discussing the chamber, and I don't think the chamber, under any circumstance, they can put it in the newspaper, they can put it out on the front sidewalk, they can put it in the town hall meeting, and they don't qualify for a public bidding process. So my recommendation to the chamber, or excuse me, to the council, is to strike the word public. And that way you're treating the chamber the same way you're treating the city or some other public entity. You're giving them the opportunity to do a bid process, but you're not holding them to the same standard that they cannot achieve. So that's my first recommendation, is if there's any feedback on that.
Can I ask you, sure, I want to ask you a question. So, in the current makeup of the state, if you were to give grant money to a Gear Up type group, would you support the same type of language that if they were allowed the bidding process, you would forego the public bidding process for that entity?
Dave, why don't you give us a little context with the Gear Up? I think some of us might not be really familiar with that program or how it fell apart.
I'm not sure I understand how it fell apart. Maybe Senator Norstrup understands it more, but people lost their lives because one particular individual took grant money from the state and the federal level and misappropriated it, and school district employees and former school district employees, I believe, had lucrative contracts with this organization. They shuffled money around. And
Was that a legal process prior to this law?
What do you
like
mean
they
by
were-
legal? They
were
received-
well within the bounds of the law by shuffling money around to themselves?
No.
They were or were not
I don't think
prior
they
to
were.
this?
I
wouldn't
think they
so.
discovered that they were abusing the money that they were given.
Yeah, that was my understanding, is that they were breaking it was an entity, they were breaking the law, they were creating shadow entities to break the law, so they're already breaking a law that existed.
But then the legislature
Made
went
a
in
super law that really made it illegal.
well, I think it
But
was.
how do you handle the school district, employees that were having sweetheart contracts with this organization, and also former school district employees having sweetheart contracts with these? I think that's the purpose of the law, is to handle those types of situations, those conflicts that were present, but no one. And then you go to the EB-5, another person that died, but was looking to have a sweetheart deal with that
My point was
organization.
just, they're already breaking the law. There was already a law in existence in both of those circumstances. So I think that, I don't think it's unreasonable to say we strike the word public. That was what I was looking for earlier when we were.
So I don't think
talking about
Senator Nordstrup answered my question.
Yeah, and I apologize, but that question with Gear Up and EB-5 goes far afield from where we are today. So let's focus in on things.
But would you consider that, and knowing hindsight what you know today, would you consider that you would strike the word public, knowing that those things, they happen, and they're outside of any state department?
There's different levels of contracts and different levels of purchases, and I think there's a lot of different answers to that, and I just don't see it as a relevant issue. But let me go down the path that I would prefer to go down if I could. We all have confidence. I think we have confidence in the bid process. For example, if I wanted to buy 1,000 gallons of gasoline or $100,000 of gasoline, I go to all the gasoline providers in town and say, submit a bid by Friday at 5 o'clock. That is a open process, but it's not a public process. And the reason it's not public is because the word public has got a specific meaning. So in this case that we've been discussing, and I'll go back to the chamber event, which is really why we're here tonight. They put out, to the best of my knowledge, information to every entity that they thought could be a potential live, real bidder. I believe 2 of them failed to respond. In the free marketplace, that's the way you do it. Some respond, some don't. Then they were down to 3 bids, and one was clearly not as good as the other 2, is my understanding. I don't have any inside information as to the dollar amounts. I don't have any inside information as to the quality, but they got down to 2 bids. And when you do that, it means that there's integrity in the system, because every potential seller had the opportunity to compete. So what I'm saying is what the process of the chamber used was open, was awesome, did everything they possibly could do on the face of this earth, but it wasn't public, and because they didn't go through the steps that the state of South Dakota requires Northern to go through. So I think it's fair in a process that the chamber did, which is open, honest, above board, and when the last step in the process was good people within our community makes the final decision. And so all I'm asking for is, if you get rid of the word public, we can still have integrity in the system. We don't lose a bit of it. But what we do is open it up to free enterprise to the same degree that it's opened up to Northern or state of South Dakota. So my recommendation, and you guys are the council, I'm here just for the recommendation, is the word public really ties the hands of free enterprise and the chamber.
With the South Dakota codified law about public bidding process, is that pertaining only to bids of over $50,000 anyways?
It
I
might, depending on the,
believe
or
it does.
25 or
Depends on the
50,
type.
yeah.
Maybe 25,000, maybe 50,000, depending on the type of.
Are there other bidding amounts aside from 25 or 50 for the minimum threshold for the public bidding process?
25 or 50 is current.
So a situation where the chamber was expecting to spend maybe $10,000 or 25, they couldn't have went through this process in the first place.
Well, we're hung up on the chamber, not that the chamber would.
Well, it's a good case in point, and Ron.
In a hypothetical, but in a hypothetical, they could choose, like, we can bid stuff under the 25,000 or 50,000 if we so want to, as a
then it
board up
doesn't
here.
apply to the open bidding process laws that are.
It doesn't apply, but we can have anything for an open bid we want. If we feel we want to try and get something, whether it's a pickup for, $12,000, we could put it out for bid.
But according to Ron, that wouldn't meet the criteria labeled in bullet 5. Even if you're going through a bidding process, that wouldn't, because that's not the South Dakota sanctioned bidding process, because it has to have a minimum floor of 25 or 50,000.
What the language there in front of you and what the language in the statute is that if the contract is subject to a public bidding process, then you're fine. You don't have to look at it. So I'm not quite sure if the dollar amounts are such that they're not subject to the public bidding process, then that particular exception wouldn't be available.
But if we
Wouldn't
struck the
apply.
word public, it sounds like it would, because it would meet enough criteria for a common person to understand that a bidding process had taken place.
We'd have to define what that bidding process
Yeah,
is if we
we'd have to set up a whole nother group of.
Yeah, I think the point is that these are taxpayer dollars that are being given out to outside entities. These are taxpayer dollars. These are not free enterprise dollars. These are taxpayer dollars. And so,
So you definitely don't think they should exclude the low bidder on these things.
And then it goes to the thing, is
so
it's a
what's
qualified
your
bidder or
point?
not?
We lay out ways to disclose a contract that that gives a direct benefit to whomever.
I'm just worried that I'm making you so mad in this whole process. I'm getting a no vote from you for the rest of the time.
Well, I don't know if
I mean, that's,
I'm clowning around.
okay. So to me, it's taxpayer dollars. Do we,
I think we keep bringing up the thing with the chamber, but this is more than just the chamber. It may be the thing that maybe brought this to our attention, but it's not the only thing that this ordinance has to protect against. And I think that's what we have to remember here, where it seems like we're trying to do something for one thing. I'm not doing this for one thing. I'm doing this for the numerous things that may come up between us and council members. This was just the one thing that brought this to our attention. Whether good or bad, this is a discussion that we would have had to have. And by the charter, through this, we found out we have to do this. We are bound by the laws that we take an oath to uphold to do this. And so we get hung up on the chamber thing. I don't want to bring them up to it anymore, because that ship has sailed. What we need to do is make sure that as we go forward, we set a expectations on how we, as council members, will disclose our conflicts, what is a conflict, and how we deal with that conflict.
Senator, did you have anything else? I'm sorry. Sidetracked us again.
Thank you. My recommendation stands that the word public is harmful to the process, and it would be good, but we'll let you have that discussion another time. I guess the other question I would ask is, in two sections, it talks about violations 2-2-G and 2-5-C, and as part of those, there doesn't seem to be we in the legislature talk a lot about due process when we do criminal law. I don't see any due process in those two sections. Does anybody want to take that question?
I think under the charter, we are a quasi-judicial board. So we would have to follow, I feel, under the Home Rule Charter, a judicial process. If we bring a charge against someone, they have the right to defend themselves, as well as we've held trials before on this board.
Okay.
So, I mean, everyone has to have their day in court. I mean, no different than you as a legislature. You guys probably have talked about things with your own members, but they could present their case just like anyone else, and we would have to rule on whether it is.
Just raising the issue, the question. Let me go on to the next thing in the interest of time. I want to commend the council. In 2017, they passed what's called the Conflict of Interest Policy, which I've got here. It is readable. It's understandable. You can actually sit down in an afternoon and get through it. And the reason I bring that up is this is readable. This is hardly readable on the proposed ordinance. There's a difference. So my recommendation is to not pass this, but insert this information, the end game, into this same format. That's a recommendation, so that then the next city council person comes on board, he doesn't read this, and there's still more to be read over here. Just put it in one place, keep it in English. And I see Ron probably smiling and nodding his head up and down. So that recommendation, I'll let you deal with that. The other thing.
And we should have materials available no different than the municipal league does.
Yes.
That talks about these. We
Yes,
should.
yes. One of the stories I want to tell is I got an opportunity to serve with Senator Nancy Turback from Watertown, very highly respected attorney. And we were debating property tax one day. And she said something that stuck. This was about 10 years ago, and I still remember what she said, so obviously it was profound and worth sharing with you. What Nancy said was, when we landed at Plymouth Rock, wouldn't have it been great before we got off the boat if we'd have made a decision as to how we're going to do sales tax, property tax, TIFs, etc. Because once we got off the boat, one guy became a farmer and one guy became an attorney. And once we did that, we started to protect our turf with the sales tax and the property tax and all that. And so what I'm worried about was we go through this. Everybody they know their profession, and they know who their clients are or who their customers are, and they know what their wife does, and they know where the kids work. And all of a sudden, everybody's saying, wow, this impacts me. And so, unfortunately, we've all got off the boat a long time ago, and we know what our profession is. We know who works at the sheriff's office, that type of thing. And so it really muddies the discussion and makes it really hard to have a discussion without bias, without conflict of interest. I do want to ask one question about the chamber. I'm going to go back to the chamber because that's why we're here today.
It's not why I'm here.
Well, it is.
It's just what
getting
started this. So.
If you read the newspaper today, on the front page, it says the reason we're here today is because of the Chamber of Commerce. So here's my question. Take all the facts as they exist with the Chamber. With 5 people got the invitation, 2 failed to respond, 1 was thrown out, and now we're down to 2. At the end of the day, if you guys pass this, I got a question. And the question is there 1 bid left on the table, or is there 2? Conflict or no conflict? Does one bid stay on the table, or does 1 bid get disqualified? That they're forced to withdraw the bid because of conflict of interest.
I'm not gonna answer a hypothetical.
Let me express a little bit of frustration. We've been discussing this for hours and hours and hours, and everybody knows about the facts, and can anybody in this room answer that question? Is there 2 bids on the table or 1? If we can't answer that, this needs to be rewritten.
So does state law need to be written?
Yeah.
We do it every year, but if you can't answer that simple question about one example where
Just-
all the facts are known, then how is a future city council person going to stay inside the guidelines? if
So
we
how's
don't know
a
the
future,
answer?
how's a future Aberdeen school board member going to know how to stay within the guidelines?
I'm not sure they do. And I propose to you, if you pass this, there will not be the knowledge as to whether you're inside or outside. If I own, an example I gave the other day on the radio, if I own a gas station and I get elected to the city council, and the city chooses to buy gas from me, and I'm fly fishing in Montana, how am I the bad guy? The answer that was given to me on the radio the other day, I'm the guy in violation if the city pulls up and buys gas. But back to my question, the chamber, I'm not getting an answer, so we'll just move on to the next issue. There's been 2 drafts, the first draft and the second draft. Was anybody in here on the city council, including the mayor, in violation of draft number 1? Was anybody in violation of draft number 1? Raise your hand, please.
Well, I'm not sure on the specifics on if money changed hands or not. And I think that would have been the impetus, and if on draft 1, which I admit was probably it got us talking about it until we all kind of stood back and think, but I'm not sure where the chamber was at in its process. So I don't know if, I think the impetus on any type of activity would have been if money exchanged hands under the first draft. I don't think at that time this became known to us.
Clint, I think he's asking, would you have been in conflict the way that the first draft was written? Like, where does your wife work?
You personally, would you?
Would I personally, would I personally been in conflict with the chamber?
No, would you have been in
No.
conflict with the first draft of the ordinance that we scrapped this morning, apparently? Where does your wife work?
She works for the Aberdeen School District.
Okay, so yes, because the school district will receive more than $100,000 this year. Mr. Olson?
That isn't what it means. Mayor, and you know.
That's
that.
what it meant in the first draft. I
You know
asked
that
the
isn't what it
city's
means.
attorney.
Well,
When you were asked on the radio whether a person's wife could work for the Parks and Rec Department, you said, of course not. How is that different?
could a
from the
city
school?
council, if I was on the city council, could my wife work for the city,
For the Parks and Rec Department?
which is the city?
Yeah,
And I think that would be a conflict that, under what we were proposing.
but you've also lumped in with it the $100,000 threshold, of which the.
Which, as you know, deals with grants. We've talked about that.
You
are
had to
trying
amend
confuse-
language to get it to grants here tonight.
Well, we are going to do that whether we needed to or not. I don't necessarily agree with the city attorney that it was unclear, but I like the idea of adding clarity. But you know that's what the intent was, Mayor. I don't understand
definitely don't
why
think-
you think it is necessary to confuse the issue or to try to suggest that we have proposed something that we haven't.
You answered the question by saying spouses were included, $100,000 was included.
And-
And so that's where I drew the conclusion that if the school district receives $100,000, they're obviously well within these guidelines. Several people here's wives work with the school district. It doesn't make sense that.
Well,
that they
here,
wouldn't
here,
be
I'm
exempt
just
in
gonna
that
lay this out.
circumstance.
I have never brought your wife into any issue, and I never would.
I was trying to figure out who would have been affected with the
And here's the
first
thing, if the city
draft.
attorney, who has told me I have conflicts with issues, there is someone who comes and applies for promotion fund, who the city attorney has said, I have a conflict. I put 0. I do not discuss that entity, etc., because I have a conflict. And I handle it that way. I never would bring your wife into it. Yes, I know my wife works for the school district, and I also disclose that on my conflict of interest forms.
It's not a personal attack. We were trying to figure out who would have had a conflict under the first draft of this
And-
thing.
and I
the way that
wasn't-
it was written, it would have been.
But the first draft is gone, and thank God. We've moved to what state law says, which is no different than what even Al has to, and even I have to navigate it as a state employee. I have to navigate that as well. If there is something in this council that is happening, I don't have one attorney I have to talk to, I have to have 2.
Lucky you.
Sometimes you don't want that, but it is one of those things where it's like, this has just gotten so to the point where it is now a process that we're trying to go through. And I know what Senator Northrup is trying to do. I wish you guys wrote laws that were kind of like a pamphlet. Trust me, I'm sitting there trying to read it, and everything is muddled, and that's all lawyer speak. But I sit there and I'm not worried about what's happening with the chamber right now, because that's just not why I'm here. I'm here to set an expectation for future council members and mayors on what is a conflict and how to remedy that conflict.
Seven council members would have been affected by the first draft.
And the first draft is gone.
And
Thank
it's
God.
gone, so now it's just me. So that's why I take a personal affront to this.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
closing remarks.
Sorry.
Many, I think we've had some discomfort with the question asked. The question asked is, was anybody in violation? There was some discomfort in the
No, there's no discomfort here. I'm trying to figure out, okay, so let me ask you, my wife works for the school district. I disclose that every year on the disclosure form.
But it was
Where do we give
prohibited behavior.
I don't appreciate your accusations, so let's just keep that. Where do we refresh my memory, where do we give $100,000 to the school district?
The school district has received $86,000 this year so far. They're set to receive a TIF payment of $22,000 in November. That'll push them up over $100,000. The way that it was worded, any entity that receives $100,000 of municipal funds.
Just slow down a little bit, okay, please? So what were the payments Oh, the TIF payments
Yeah.
go to
Over
a
taxing.
TIF, okay, I got you.
Basically, the
I
TIF
got
was
you.
paid off, the bonds, the monies from the property tax payments are there. That's tax money as a rebate, that we have to pay the same to the county as well as the James Valley or James River Water Development Board, because basically the TIF is paid off. And now they receive those taxpayer dollars because the TIF is paid off.
So I don't think if I'm conflicted with the original, I am conflicted with this one also.
Not if we change it to, say, grants, because it's certainly not grant money, but it's municipal funds.
So include it. Include it. If you're going to accuse me of something, include it.
I think
And then
that we
I
should be
will-
fair to everyone. I don't think
Well,
that we
that's
should screw
fine.
anybody in this room,
Include it.
including you, Dave.
Include it. I obviously wasn't following the trail there, so include it. I don't care. I mean, there's still, disclosure is your out here, okay? Disclosure is the out, in my opinion. So, include it.
Closing remarks?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Senator Al.
Commissioner Busness, you and I have known each other for a long time, and I consider you a friend. I consider you a very ethical person, and I compliment you for all that you've done for Aberdeen. And there's no but coming, that's the end of it. But I do believe, there was a but. I do believe if disclosure is the issue, we don't need 5 pages to say disclosure is the issue. We can do that in this pamphlet in less than 5 pages.
So why did you do it for school district employees? And you voted for this.
That is correct. And if it was just those 3 line items, and just exactly cut and paste those, but there's a lot more beyond that. For example, the $100,000 is not in state law. The greater than 50%, but finishing the closing statement, I've known many of you guys for years, and you got, everybody up here is a person of integrity. None of you are cheating, stealing, robbing, cutting corners. You're all good people, every one of you. We've got better things to do than argue about this. What we should be doing is attempting to entice more businesses to move to Aberdeen. We should be fixing the roads, etc. There's a lot of things we can be doing, but to make this job so complicated that nobody wants it, and so dangerous that nobody wants it. Who's going to want to run for city council, or who's going to want to be mayor after we make it? My wife can't work here, I can't own a gas station, I can't sell lumber at the lumber company, so my closing remarks is just, we don't need this whole discussion. We're good people, it's been 20 years since we've had a problem in Aberdeen, and I believe that problem will never reoccur. When I was talking to Governor Rounds once, and I said to Mike, Mike said to me, he said, we have no bad programs in South Dakota. And I said, really? We've got thousands of programs. You tell me none of them are bad? He says, yeah, none of them are bad. I said, what are you saying? He says, because every time we have a bad program, it can be in Bowdle, South Dakota, and my phone rings, and somebody tells me we've got a bad program. If somebody's cheating, stealing, cutting corners in South Dakota, the phone rings, they report it. If we have a problem in Aberdeen, somebody has got a conflict of interest. The phone will ring, and we'll have a discussion, and you can either bring it up in the newspaper or bring it up at the next election. I just think this is a misuse of our time when there's much better things to do. Thank you for indulging me tonight.
Councilman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Senator, for your remarks. The senator mentioned a few words that certainly have gotten my attention. One of those being that we should be interested in new business in Aberdeen, trying to help businesses getting started. This council gives money, thousands of dollars every year to promote Aberdeen, to help small businesses get started. We do that every single year because we want Aberdeen to grow. I thank Councilmember Ronayne for bringing this forward. It's something that this council must do, according to our charter. If he wouldn't have done it, someone else would have. And the senator may have referred to an incident several years ago. Many of you probably remember where we did have a mayor and a council member and a city attorney involved in a scandalous affair. And I believe that the charter was formed and these restrictions because that taste was fresh in their mouth at the time. And they did not want something like that to ever happen to Aberdeen again. We have big responsibilities as we serve as your council members. You elected us to represent you honestly and fairly, unbiased, with nothing influencing our decision-making, thereby instilling trust and integrity to the offices we hold. There's certain language in our charter that I think are very significant. They're words like integrity, impartiality, dedication to the best interests of the city and the public trust, preserving public confidence, respect for the government, courtesy, impartiality, equality. It goes on and on. If it were my decision solely, I would not want to take any taxpayer dollars because of the position I hold as council member. I just feel that's wrong. Period. Zero. I don't want my involvement in receiving taxpayer dollars as a council member to influence me in my decisions. And that could happen. And so I'm against council members, anyone on this council, receiving any taxpayer dollars for anything we're involved in. I sacrificed that when I accepted this position as council member when Lori Swanson resigned, because she wanted her family business to prosper in the city of Aberdeen and be eligible for contracts through the city. And I commend her for that. Very honorable thing she did, which brought me to this council. And I had been doing some consulting work for the city prior to my appointment on the council. And I realized at that moment that I could not be involved in any city business whatsoever in the future if I expected to hold this office. That was my choice. And I felt it was best for me to try to represent my district if they would vote for me, which they did. And so I feel I owe them a lot. And whenever the public has to question our motives for an action we take or conduct that we're involved in, it should give rise to all of us to do something, to correct that. And so I'm very in favor of this. It's going to allow things that the state law allows. And so I'm going to support this. And there will be many amendments, I'm sure. But we'll work our way through this. And we thank the public for coming in and giving us your comments. It means a lot to us. But we have a representation of 30 or 40 people here. There are thousands of other people in this community that aren't here tonight. Where do they stand? I'm not certain. But we're willing to listen to everyone, all citizens in the community.
I'd like you to listen to me for one moment.
Can we have him identify himself?
I'm sorry, it's kind of out of procedure. I'd like to have you speak, but it's kind of out of the protocol.
You can come up to
If
the
you want to come up to the,
Come up to
You
the
can come up to the
microphone.
come up to
podium.
the microphone. Please introduce yourself too when you begin to speak, so.
My name is David Franson. I'm a semi-retired attorney in this town, and the only thing I'd like to say is in the discussion here about the citizens who do the voting, I would like to point out that this mayor defeated a sitting mayor by a margin of 2-1. Thank you. It wasn't even close.
Can we
I think we're
entertain?
all aware of that. But I'm just saying that I personally am not in favor of a member on this council receiving any taxpayer dollars in any form or fashion so that it has no effect on our decision-making for the public. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Olson, for your contribution. I would entertain a motion to add to Rob's example of changing the word allocation to grants throughout this, so that that would affect the $100,000 threshold and take entities like the school district and Dakota Bank and all of those entities off. So we would, I believe grants would limit us to the Convention and Visitors Bureau and so forth.
So my motion would be to everywhere where it says "an allocation," substitute the phrase "an allocation for a grant."
Can I get a second on that motion?
May I ask a question from an administrative perspective? So when you say grant, you're talking about anything that does not involve sale of goods or
Okay.
contract or
Th-
agreement?
Thank you. I'm gonna change it again. "An allocation" substituted for a non-contractual grant.
Thank you.
Second.
So what is an example of a contractual grant?
I have
Councilman
no idea,
Renee?
but if it's contractual, that was the difference that Lynn was asking. He wanted to make clear that we're not talking about any contractual issues.
So basically, like someone right in Sudlow, they will have to sign contracts to do that type of work, where the Chamber of Commerce comes to us, they present, same as the CVB, and we basically decide how much money they get, and they take their allocation throughout the year. It's not a
All in
contract.
favor of the amendment that would add the word allocation of a grant of municipal funds?
Can
Roll
I
call.
just, so your thoughts on the language?
To substitute non-contractual grant for every place within the ordinance that the word allocation is.
Well, just in the context of that first 2-2.2 subsection A, where it has that entire copy and paste stream of words, including municipal funds for the calendar year of the commencement, that occurrence is numerous times throughout this document.
I'm sorry, I wasn't sure what, my understanding of the amendment was that every place that allocation occurs, that it will be replaced with non-contractual grant.
Unless the word allocation happens randomly throughout this document, not in that context.
Maybe we want to hold this till
Yeah.
next time then.
I think each
Yeah,
time we see
I-
it, it's,
I withdraw my motion.
And I'll second the withdrawal. I think we need to think about that just a little bit.
Is someone proposing a motion to table this thing then until we're ready to discuss it at further length?
We would have to actually approve the amendment so that the public would be able to view it, and then we could then motion to continue until the next.
Sounds good. Can I get a motion to approve?
We already have a motion to.
Oh, can I get a roll call vote then? We've got a motion and a second on that. Carl, you probably are still awake over there?
Still here. Councilmember Rux,
Aye.
Olson,
Aye.
Bunceness.
Aye.
Johnson,
aye.
Rife,
Aye.
Lunsman,
Aye.
Ronayne,
Aye.
Remley,
Aye.
Mayor Shonneman.
Aye, motion does carry. We will replace this language with the rest, publish it. Can I get a motion to table the thing for a couple of weeks till Josh returns?
Yeah, I'm gone next week, I guess.
So let's I don't think we need a motion.
No, I think we
We're
just-
by consensus, will say that this will not be on the agenda until
2 weeks.
2 weeks from tonight.
14th? October 14th?
Is that acceptable?
We can make that happen, I believe.
So if I could, then what I will do,
15th, 14th is a holiday.
what I will do for the council is I will put together for the document as approved tonight for first reading, and then I will also start working on some language to circulate with potential amendments as consistent with the discussions tonight.
So the public can find that, language where?
If we could post it to the website, that would be
We can put it on the front page on the left side.
perfect.
So we'll post both the document as approved tonight at first reading, and then if I can come up with language, do you want me to put that on as well? Or do you want to wait with the potential amendment language?
Well, we would have to have a third reading, I think, if we have potential amendments. I don't know how other people are thinking,
It
but
sounds as though we're not doing a first reading tonight anyway, so
Well-
let's have a first and a second reading.
no,
2 weeks
no, we
out.
are doing the first reading. We just approved first reading.
That was the, to amend it, not to approve
No,
it.
that was first reading.
That was first reading, as amended. It's been a while. Right?
I understood that we took a roll call vote to make this amendment not to approve.
We're going to
Motion to
taking the notes.
So, originally, I asked the city attorney is if we needed to move the original language and then amend that language. He then said that this could stand on its own because it's still under the title of, so that motion was to approve first reading of the,
We didn't take a
Yeah,
vote on
Carl
approving the
Carl
amendment.
has the exact, not the, well,
Well,
as it
the
appears.
way I have it listed is Bunceness made the motion, Ronayne made the second, to approve first reading of ordinance number 190903 as distributed on 9/30/19, this today, which is.
So we didn't take a motion to accept this amended version. We just
Took a
we
motion to have first
approve.
reading to approve
The
the
amended version.
amended version.
because the
Right.
city attorney said it could be substituted.
I would like to amend my vote, if it's not too late then, to a no. Still passes.
I'll note it.
Next item to discuss is the recommendation of the de-icing salt bids. Possible approval to reject all bids received for the 2,000 tons of de-icing salt for Public Works Department. Robin, are you still with us?
I'm here. The bids came in about $10 higher than the local bids through the DOT. There's a lot of market factors that go into this, but we bid it slightly later than theirs, so their conditions may have been more favorable. Our plan is to go back out and rebid and hope for a little better result. At this point, we really don't have much to lose. It's a $20,000 swing, so I'd rather go out and rebid, so that's the recommendation.
Thank you. Can I get a
No,
motion?
first reading, or the rejection of bids, I'm sorry.
Second.
Got a motion from Bunceness and a second from Rutz to reject those bids. Can I get a roll call vote, Carl?
Councilmember Remley?
Aye.
Ronayne?
Aye.
Lunsman?
Aye.
Rife?
Aye.
Johnson?
Aye.
Bunceness?
Aye.
Olson?
Aye.
Ruggs?
Aye.
Mayor Shonneman?
Aye, motion does carries. Next item to discuss is the change order pay estimate for the street maintenance concrete repair project. Possible approval of the change order number 1 in the amount of $7,300 and pay estimate 1 in the amount of $87,459 to CWF Masonry and Construction for work on street maintenance concrete repair project. Robin.
The same thing as we did earlier in the year. This is the second phase, the fall phase for next year's work. We're trying to get ahead of our project for next year. The work done under the change order was for some curbing and retaining wall along Fairgrounds Road near the levee. And the rest of the work was basically curb and gutter. You've seen some of it probably down by Mazatlan and the Flame.
can I get a motion for that change order and pay estimate?
Second.
Motion from Bunsen and a second from Ronayne. Carl, can I get a roll call vote?
Councilmember Ruggs.
Aye.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Rife.
Aye.
Lunsman.
Aye.
Ronayne.
Aye.
Remley.
Aye.
Mayor Shonneman.
Aye, motion does carry. Next, we've got the pay estimate number 2, Klein Street Storm Sewer Project, B&B contracting for $468,179. Possible approval to pay estimate in amount of $468,179 to B&B contracting for the work on the Klein Street project. Can I get a motion to make that payment?
So moved.
Second.
Motion from Johnson and a second from Mark Remley. I guess we'll take another roll call vote. Carl.
Councilmember Remley.
Aye.
Ronayne.
Aye.
Lunsman.
Aye.
Rife.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Bunceness.
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Rux.
Aye.
Mayor Shonneman.
Aye, motion does carry. Next, we've got municipal bills, approval for the bill list in September 30th today. Pull up that list on our screens. Does anyone have any questions before we vote on that?
Okay.
Otherwise, I'll take a motion to make a payment on those bills.
Move to approve. Second.
Motion from Rowley and a second from Lunsman. Carl, can I get a roll call vote on that, please?
Councilmember Ruggs.
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Bunceness.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Rife.
Aye.
Lunsman.
Aye.
Ronayne.
Aye.
Remley.
Aye.
Mayor Shonneman.
Aye, motion does carry. We will pay those bills. Next, we've got the payroll approval for the period of September 15th through September 20th, 2019, in the city's share of Social Security, old age survivors insurance, retirement, health, and life insurance. Can I get a motion on that, please?
Second.
Who's the first one?
I was.
Motion from Johnson and a second from Olson. Carl, can I get a roll call vote on the payroll?
Councilmember Remley.
Aye.
Ronayne.
Aye.
Lunsman.
Aye.
Rife.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Bunceness.
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Rux.
Aye.
Mayor Shonneman.
Aye, motion does carry. Lynn, what have you got for us tonight?
I heard something this evening that's going to force me to change as to when I was going to bring forth request. And the request was to bring forth promotion fund process, and I had that scheduled for October 7th, and you were the one who requested it, and you're going to be gone. So if it's okay with the council, I'm going to move that to like October 28th then.
Sure.
Have all the material come forward at that time. And I just wanted to state it up front because I see Casey.
Casey.
Sitting out
Stacy.
there. Casey.
At this stage in the game, he just wants to go.
You can be whoever you want tonight. That's all I have.
I have one thing.
What have you got, Dave?
So I'm asking for a consensus from the group to bring a few things forward, presentations. And the first one is, I would like us to review the landscape ordinance. And in order to do that, I think we should have city staff present to us what the existing ordinance says, what the purpose was, some history, and that would not include any,
You hate trees, Dave.
any voting. It's just a presentation, then we go from there.
That sounds good. Does
Okay,
anyone
and then
have
I
any
could-
objection to that? Otherwise, we'll do it. Good. What have you got? One more thing, Dave.
Two more things. I know there's a group that is discussing mental health issues. I think from the police and legal side and mental health side. So I would like to have a presentation from that group in what we're seeing as mental health issues in the community, and maybe spur some conversation on what this council can do to help that group or help that situation. So I'm asking for that presentation. The third presentation is, and I'm hitting the chief of police pretty hard tonight, that we have a presentation on drug use in the community of Aberdeen, and whatever that entails, and hopefully spurs a conversation on what this council can do to help battle that issue. And I have one more. I forgot. One of the things that I'm seeing in the past few years is the disrespect for our police officers in the field, and they take a lot of abuse, And when those individuals that do that give minor infractions, I'm concerned that all we're doing is creating more disrespect for our police officers. So I would like to wade into that area and see what this council can do to help the judicial people in this community understand our concerns in protecting our police officers.
Some things have been, in that regard, some things have happened in some cities where they've tackled that issue in states. So
Dave, you're talking about increasing punishments for things like attacking police officers and stuff.
I don't know what I'm talking about, but I want to know what's happening. I've saw some video, and I understand that particular individual that threatened our police officer with their life, spat on him, kicked, headbutted an officer, got off with basically nothing.
Wow.
And I'm concerned about that.
No doubt. Dave, brush up on your PowerPoint skills.
All right, and just to clarify, so Councilman, are you looking for maybe a review of all cases from a particular year involving an attack and an assault on a police officer, and then the consequence as it played out in a
I think
court
that would be the
disposition,
start.
and then
Yep.
using that to kind of go forward in that? Okay.
Yes.
All right, very good.
Thank you.
Can I get a motion to adjourn this meeting if no one else has anything to add?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
A motion from Dave and a second from, was that you?